Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman and welcome to Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to episode 28. My notes just said 8, and I knew that was not correct. Today, our guest is Vicar Paul Larson, who earned his Master's of Divinity as a recent seminary graduate from United Lutheran Seminary, and is currently serving as the interim youth director at the East Bay Lutheran Youth Parish in Oakland, California. It's very exciting.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Good morning.
It doesn't matter at what time. Why doesn't I don't know. Who knows when they're going to hear it? But yes, currently we're in one of the. It's morning for Paul. It's afternoon for me as we have our cross country conversation.
Yes, I'm excited to get going.
Yeah, me too. Paul and I actually are in like a Bible studies together once a week, so we talk about the Bible a lot. But now we're doing it like publicly.
It's always a good time, I feel like.
Well, today we're going to talk about the gospel reading for Sunday, October 24th, which is again in the Gospel of Mark. I know we've been talking a lot about the Gospel of Mark lately, but that's just where we're at in our year, as well as I think there's just a lot of good nuggets for us to talk about as Jesus is out and about leading his disciples around the countryside, doing a bunch of teachings and healings and that kind of stuff. So anyways.
Just wandering.
Yep, that's pretty much what they're doing, it feels like. Anyways, so we catch up with Jesus today in Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. And this is the New Revised Standard Version. As Jesus and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on his way. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I always feel like you have to say that at the end of a gospel reading. And like it's just, 30 years of going to church has taught me that anytime someone reads from the gospel, that's just what you say.
I find myself like mentally doing it every time after someone reads it. I'm just like, I can't.
Did you know, I found this out because I now also serve in Episcopalian church, that if it's not a Eucharist service, you don't say that. It's just you respond like a normal reading.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Good to know.
I haven't totally dug deep into why that is yet. But I learned that the hard way as I was putting together a service. Charlie, our friend Charlie, was supplying for me, and he is not ordained yet. And so I was putting together this service, and I always send it. I have another priest that is a member of the parish.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, like anytime I do anything, I send it to her to take a look at to make sure it's, correct in the Episcopal world. And she pointed that out to me, and I was like, "That's interesting. It's a new fun fact." So
coming from the West Coast to the East Coast, and like I did my seminary education in the Church of Gordon Lathrop, where he used to be the pastor of. So it was like very liturgical. Like high church East Coast. And I was just like, the first day I was there, they tried to like put the piece of bread in my mouth. And I was like, what is going on? I've never done this before. Because I'm just so used to like doing it different ways. So
yeah,
it's a different.
Can I just Can I touch it? Can I take that
Yeah.
from you?
Yeah.
That's actually interesting, as like, because I know churches that also same Midwest, that wasn't a thing. Maybe if you
Right?
were Catholic, but I other than that, I don't know anyone else that really did that way. But then yeah, coming to the East Coast, and it's just like, because I've had to do that where people just like stick out their tongue at me, and I'm like, okay,
Okay. I was just
I
like, everyone's doing this. And I'm like,
yeah.
what's going on? Anyways.
Yeah, fun stuff. Just as as you move around, it doesn't matter, like it's not necessarily denomination to denomination, but just church to church, place to place, things are different. This has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible reading. I just am now thinking about it. It's just sort of like, also when you go to churches and they're like, well, this is the way it's done. And it's like, maybe here, but not necessarily anywhere else. So
maybe tell me first before you like.
Well, I just think about a matter of like putting things into perspective too, when some churches are really caught on some of these things. And I know that like COVID has challenged most of these like weird traditions that each congregation would have. But just, that we can get caught up in those things and kind of, I think, forget what the bigger picture is. But Jesus, right? So the bigger picture, back to the Bible, as I sit on my little church soapbox over here. Anyways, we catch up with Jesus doing some healing again this week, which is, I think, what people just like. Hasn't Jesus, this is like the 10 billionth Sunday after Pentecost. Hasn't Jesus just been healing people for like 2,000 years?
Just shows up in Mark and then just starts healing people.
Yep.
That's all he does in this year.
Yeah, which is like kind of fun to think about, like that's the general focus of the gospel, but it's also kind of interesting to think about like just some of the other things that like the other gospels include, and it's just like none of that's important to Mark.
No. You just find him like Snow White in the wilderness.
This is not what Mark wants you to know. All the way up to, I don't know if people know, like Mark doesn't have like a birth narrative.
Yeah.
Like Mark doesn't give a shit where Jesus was born. That's not the point.
That's not the point. Just go to the wilderness, Jesus.
Skip that part. Yeah. We just catch up with Jesus when he's 30, and we're like, all right.
And the disciples still don't know.
No, just never.
Never.
Paul, we have talked about this the last few weeks. Just two of the Markian disciples. Which we of course see again here today. To me it's almost like, which they start to do this, I don't think as much in Mark, but they do in some of the other gospels, kind of start to act as like a bodyguards to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Like if people are just getting like too close to Jesus, right? Like that's when they start to like push back.
Yeah.
And I think we see some of that here today with the disciples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we constantly see like them just being stumbling blocks. I think just kind of go back to that cliche.
Get behind me, Satan. So something we see here today in this particular story with Bart, which by the way, Bartimaeus just means son of Timaeus. So for anybody who cares about a little bit about maybe a background, is just that redundancy that we see Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, is just maybe assumed that like the author is assuming the readers aren't like native Hebrew speakers and wouldn't know some of those like fine details, which that's really a fun fact. Doesn't necessarily affect our conversation today. Anyways, Bart's blind and comes to Jesus, and this is the part I know that was super uncomfortable for me, and I think for also you too, Paul, where they're like, many sternly ordered him to be quiet. Like they wanted to, they silenced him. Mm-hmm. And we don't necessarily really get why. Like, are they silencing him because like Jesus is just like so important they don't want him to bother them, or why are they silencing him in this moment?
I'm always really interested in understanding. Yeah, why is like why do the disciples keep getting in the way constantly,
Mhm.
and especially this morning where he's on the side of the road and he just like calls out like Jesus, son of David, and like that's something that you just normally wouldn't hear, or maybe I could say in a personal like if someone were yelling that on the side of the road, I probably wouldn't listen. But like that's how important it is for him to be naming that when the disciples still have not seen that he is Jesus of Nazareth.
Right. So when he is Jesus of Nazareth, right, and that Bart calls him son of David, that is like there's
Mm-hmm.
a significant piece of that, especially because this is right before the Palm Sunday ride, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
before his, which doesn't necessarily take place on a Sunday, his glorious ride into Jerusalem on the back of a colt or donkey, whatever you want to call it, and people are laying their cloaks and tree branches and stuff like that in the street for him to walk on, screaming, the son of David. Bart, Bart says it first.
Yeah.
And that is significant for him to proclaim that when it hasn't been like widely proclaimed yet, that's not a title that's been given to Jesus yet.
And I think it speaks to the sort of how Kenny, you talked about this, how we kind of try to be, I don't like the word gatekeeper, but just like the security guard at the club, we don't
Yeah.
want to like let someone in from the alley. We just want
Well,
to
that's why, like, I
protect.
think the disciples often act as
Mm-hmm.
those, which again is to understand too. Like, let's remember that this is like the author of Mark is writing the story from a certain perspective in order to get something across to their audience.
Yeah.
And so often in the Gospel of Mark, so it's that disciple thing, they're using the disciples as a literary device in order to point something out to us in the
Yeah.
story. And so quite frequently what that is them putting the disciples in the way or somehow blocking or guarding people from
Mm-hmm.
getting to Jesus, of like, sort of they represent like we can be in the way of Jesus doing his ministry, doing the thing, doing the healing, right? And so it's the same, right? Like they're sort
Yeah.
of like they're blocking Jesus from doing the thing. And in every single one of these stories, like what happens, right? Jesus does it anyways.
Yeah. He still meets with the person and like
Always, even like
always.
the Gentiles, no matter where they're at, like no matter what the disciples say, he does it anyways.
Yeah. And sometimes he
um
might even be a jerk, but he still
yeah.
meets with them. Hopefully no one hears that and is like, you just called Jesus a jerk.
It's fine if they hear it. You can go to salemsouthbaltimore.com/sermons and scroll down. I literally have a sermon entitled Jesus the Jerk,
Love it.
about his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. And
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to go take a look at that.
Yeah.
So
Great plug.
I don't often do that, but just it fit.
If it.
Hair toss. And so they sternly order him to be quiet. This part just gets me as I think about all of the different times, even till today in our society. I know that I've had them personally, other people that I've talked to, and members of my family I've had these conversations with, that there are just some things that like you're not supposed to talk about, that
Yeah.
like as a society we have silenced people from like owning their needs, and talking about stuff. A big one I think is mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a big taboo. And I think it's getting better, definitely amongst various circles that I know that we're involved in. Like I think that clergy and folks that work for the church are doing a lot better than they used to at like seeking out mental health stuff, as well as
Mm-hmm.
like encouraging others to do so.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was always the case. Like I think like people went to the church for mental health therapy, and it's like this is not what you're looking for.
And I think one of the things that I am really appreciating is particularly some of the folks that we've gone to seminary with are very like open about their struggles with mental health in a way that like we've oftentimes put pastors on a pedestal, like, oh, you don't suffer from depression and anxiety. I'm a sufferer of both of those things. And I know last month was it Suicide Prevention Month, during the month of September, and continued to see a lot of folks like say, hey, reach out to me, and because it's something that's so important, especially right now during these weird COVID times, whatever, post pandemic, I don't know where we are. And we're seeing just death so much around us. And like, how do we continue to be supportive of our folks who are experiencing emotions that maybe we in the past have just wanted to say, oh, just get over it. But it's like, no, like these are real, tangible feelings that we're feeling right now.
Yeah. I also struggle from anxiety and have taken medication and gone to counseling and those kinds of things. And it was all like, I'm really grateful for that and helpful for that.
Yeah.
But I even still remember like the first time that I sought mental health counseling for that, like it was a you don't talk about it thing. Like it was sort of like I don't know if it was just like where I was or the people that I was around, but it was like that's a thing you can do maybe, but like you don't talk about it, which is hard because then like finding out that like, oh, I also had family that also struggled from this exact same thing, right? And like, oh, well, if we could actually talk about it, maybe we could help each other rather than silencing each other and silencing these, right?
Right.
Another along the same lines, I particularly think about is I have gone through fertility treatments and issues and stuff, is that's a big one, right? That like women are actually ordered to be silent about pregnancy and for fertility issues and miscarriages and things like that. Like I remember when when we first were telling just like close family and stuff that like, oh, we it finally worked, right? Like we're having a baby, because I had a struggle with that, right? Like I don't even know if I have said this publicly yet because of this same sort of thing. Is like I had to have 2 surgeries on my uterus before I could get pregnant. Like it was a lot, right? Like, and so there's a lot of women out there that are struggling with these kind of issues that are being silenced. And I remember when we were first telling like some close family and friends and stuff. And like one person actually was like, ordered us to be silent. Was like, you shouldn't be telling people. Like, we're not telling people, we're telling you, first of all. But second, like this is still a very common thing of silencing people.
Yeah. Or silencing. I know around Advent, a lot of people have a hard time with sort of the story of Mary and if they've experienced a miscarriage, and like how we as a church have totally just glossed over it. And we don't want to like have those conversations on ways that we can really help people who are experiencing emotions and so much, that we can be supportive and remind them that like we're here for you, we care for you, we love you.
I always struggle with Advent imagery and that, and thinking about that same thing of sort of like, because there's a lot of women in our society that just they're unable to have children, and so I struggle with that whole somewhat value that we put on Mary to like, is her worth that she was able to birth a child? And also then when we silence people from talking, women from sharing and being able to like, I think get probably healthy resources and conversations that they need, right? Like, are we perpetuating this same stereotype?
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to have the conversation, right? And I think that's when we silence women, we're not having them. When we're just telling people, don't talk about this.
Or somehow you've done something wrong. And it's like, no.
Yes. No. Or that there's or that even worse, that there's something wrong with you. Which is something that touches, I think, into a deeper sort of theology that can be struggled with throughout some of, I think, the healing stories and stuff like that in the Bible. Is that when we have folks like Bart that come to Jesus, right? Like, do we immediately think, oh, there's something wrong with him?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the language that we use. And like, well, good thing Jesus was there to fix him. And so, this language leads to some troubling stuff that we have perpetuated with folks that do live with disabilities
Mm-hmm.
and that are born with them, that gain them, throughout life, and that they're somehow still labeled as there's something wrong with them. And there are some really good theologians who use their differently abled bodies to actually really profess the gospel in like such meaningful ways, as that's not a disability to them, right? That language that we use, that disability even, is that, oh, that's indicating there's something wrong with you, rather than like, people have different abilities,
Yeah.
and that's just part of it, I think. And so I think that's something that we have to maybe talk about more.
Mm-hmm. And I know from my own perspective, this is one of the things I struggled with was I didn't have those resources as a seminarian, and
Yeah.
like what that maybe we could have a place for
Yeah,
a
Paul and I
class.
were reflecting on this before we started recording, that like, out of all the different like perspectives of theology and systematics and stuff, it's like, oh, this was one that like suspiciously was not included in our seminary education, which is
a testament to how important it is that we actually have this.
well, but also I was gonna say,
Yeah.
like, it's I just, to call out our own gaping gaps of education,
Yeah.
and that it's something, we still have room to learn. I mean, I certainly do.
For sure.
I had the privilege a few years ago to go to the event at the ELCA National Youth Gathering called Table. It is a smaller gathering. There are two smaller gatherings that happen immediately before the larger ELCA National Youth Gathering. There's Mile, which is Multicultural Youth Leadership, and then there is Table, which is differently abled youth. And so they have their own event, and it was just it was a beautiful blessing for me to be able to be included and to be able to kind of share in their stories and perspective of theology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they would read this, they're not reading there's something wrong with Bart. They're reading, which I encourage everyone to relook at it this way, they're reading Jesus saw Bart exactly for who he was, and didn't ignore him and talked to him, and it recognized him, and seeing him, right?
Yeah.
How many people would have just passed by him, didn't see him, wouldn't have paid any attention, that he's an invisible person, he is just not important, right? And Jesus sees him.
Yeah.
And also, what another thing? Sorry, I'll let you talk at some point.
No, it's fine
because you are my guest. But
it is all good.
About the things that like he sees, that again, this pitting against the disciples that they don't see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So him calling out Jesus as the son of David, he even in his blindness, he sees something in Jesus that they don't see yet. That's a gift that he has.
Yeah. And then just when Jesus calls him, like, he just gives up his cloak and just simply goes, like, trusting in the faith that Jesus is going to heal him. And I think in so many ways as Christians, we assume we're like, whether it's the Good Samaritan or we're going to be the ones who just will drop everything and simply go. And this guy is literally dropping his possessions and trusting in the faith, and Jesus sends him on his way to do ministry. Mm-hmm. And in earlier weeks, we heard from the disciples where they were pissed that this other group was starting to do their work, and he goes, "Homeboys, you should be actually, for a second. Let's take a pause and celebrate that this group who are followers in this Jesus movement are sending this message of into the kingdom of God to God's faithful people, that God never leaves our side, that God is there with us, and God calls us into action and to be people of faith and to be those beacons of Christ in this world that is so broken and complex, and to simply just go and to trust. And it takes a lot of work. And I can't say that I would be a person that would just drop everything and go, but
I think it depends on like who or how we
yeah,
identify in each of those stories, right? And so like in this
yeah,
particular story, like who do you identify with?
mhm,
You know, and I think that's a tough one. Like,
yeah,
do you identify as some people have the complex, right? They're like they might identify with Jesus, right? Like they're out there doing the thing.
mhm,
They're fixing, they're doing the thing. And then you have you know, people that maybe identify, you know, more with Bartimaeus and
mhm,
that they are crying out to be heard, to be healed, to be seen.
yeah,
And worth like got nothing left to lose, drop everything that you have for that kind of people. Or are you a disciple and you really identify with those that are kind of, you know, they're on the insider, they're on their right hand to the big guy, and they're doing, you know, you're along for the ride and you're just a part of this movement and you think you've got it all figured out, but really you're getting in the way of the
mm,
work. I think I might identify, honestly, if I'm being totally
yeah.
honest, probably identify with the disciples, right? Like
I I can say that.
how often do we get in the way?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I can.
that's a tough thing to admit. It's a tough thing to think for anybody. And so, you know, it's one of those sort of like, oh man, we gotta stop and reprioritize over here.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would agree with you. I probably would identify with the disciples, like who just don't just try to be the security guard or the bouncer of the club. I just
Yeah.
want. Yeah,
And I I think that that's something for all for you know to really wrestle with, right? Of
yeah.
like, what does that mean for us?
Hmm.
And also again, like, so having that perspective is like, I really do think that that is the point of the disciples in the Gospel of Mark, is for us
For
to
sure.
continually self-reflect on that,
Yeah,
and to see our part of the story.
yeah. And like I know we probably don't want to like. This is one of the things that Mark is not my favorite gospel. I'm a John fan, and like this is why I love the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John. It's like, oh, that's you. Like we're the beloved disciples. And then here in Mark, and I think it like helps to make us, now I'm sort of seeing a connection like in a whole new way of like Mark, and like I really like that idea of like maybe I'm the disciple, and I need to get that
The
clear.
disciple.
The disciple, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I think that that's the thing about like having multiple gospels included, right? Is like
Yeah,
it's you are both the disciple and the
yeah.
beloved
Yeah,
disciple, you
that's so
know.
beautiful. Very Lutheran.
Oh, I do what I can. I just you wouldn't believe that. I just thought of that right off the top of my head.
So long, Satan sinner. I'm a disciple or the beloved disciple.
Yeah. Um, I just think there's a lot that we can learn from characters like Bart.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot still to be challenged with us, and you know, some ideas of traditional theology about able
Mhm.
bodies and about
Yeah.
what it means when Jesus is healing folks, right?
Right. And I think sort of when I look to what I want like people to take away, and is that like to see ourselves in these texts and to sort of and see where the places our preconceived notions, our
Mm-hmm.
unconscious bias permeates. Because there are times when I first read the text and I'm just like, I'm still in my very young Lutheran perspective. And it wasn't until college that I started realizing there were whole other ways to look at the gospel.
Yeah.
Even for myself as a Mexican American queer man, like I didn't realize it took being in a class with a professor of color to tell me like there's liberation theology, and to like come into age of understanding this liberation and of God's love for us in this world.
Mm-hmm. And the pieces of liberation that we can see in, the whole thing, right? And I think that's again what we're seeing here too. But yeah, so I think I'm going to challenge everybody as we take off today to really kind of rethink, including both Paul and I, as we would like to identify that something we also need to be challenged on is to sort of rethink our theology when it comes around abled bodies.
Yeah.
And differently abled bodies and the abilities of each of us and how we see ourselves in the story.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this Jesus of compassion, and
always.
I love it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. And I think a really great discussion and some things that needed to be named and to be challenged. And everyone, you can look for us next Tuesday on Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. And subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can get the newest episodes. You can get notifications right on your phone. Anyways, take care, everyone, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.